June 10, 1944, Oradour-sur-Glane, France. A peaceful Saturday afternoon in a village that stood for 1,000 years. Children playing in the square, women preparing lunch, men working in the fields. At 2 p.m., trucks roll into town. Waffen SS soldiers jump out, armed to the teeth. They round up every single person, 642 civilians, men, women, children, babies. They separate them. The women and children are locked in the church. The men are herded into barns. And then the SS does something so monstrous it will become a symbol of Nazi barbarism. They burn them all alive. 445 women and children incinerated in a church. 197 men machine-gunned and burned in barns. This is the story of the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre. But it's also the story of what happened to the men who did it. Because unlike most Nazi war criminals, some of these bastards actually face justice. And I'm warning you now, this is hard to stomach. Let's go back 4 days. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy. The liberation of France has begun. Hitler's response is immediate. Send reinforcements. Crush the invasion. Among the units ordered north is the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. This isn't just any military unit. Das Reich is an elite Waffen SS armored division with about 15,000 men. They've spent the last 2 years on the Eastern Front fighting Soviets. And they've learned their trade well. Mass reprisals, collective punishment, burning villages, hanging civilians. That's how they operated in Russia and Ukraine. Now they're bringing those tactics to France. The division is stationed near Montauban in southern France, about 450 miles south of Normandy. Their orders are simple. Get to the front as fast as possible. But there's a complication. The French resistance, the maquis, controls large parts of the countryside. They're sabotaging roads, blowing up bridges, ambushing German convoys, and they're getting bolder since D-Day. The commander of Das Reich is SS Brigade Führer Heinz Lammerding. He's 38 years old, a true believer in Nazi ideology, and he's got a solution to the resistance problem. On June 5th, just 1 day before D-Day, Lammerding drafts what becomes known as Plan Lammerding. It's a memo to German Army Group G outlining his strategy for dealing with partisans. The plan is brutal. For every German soldier wounded, execute 3 French civilians. For every German killed, execute 10. Deport 5,000 males to concentration camps. Seize all vehicles and fuel. In other words, total war against the civilian population. Army Group G approves the plan. Now Lammerding has official permission to terrorize France. As Das Reich begins its march north, they leave a trail of blood. On June 2nd, they burn 29 farms near Terrasson as reprisal for resistance activity. On June 1st, they execute 9 civilians near Calais. They're setting the stage for what's coming. June 7th, 1944. The town of Tulle, about 50 miles east of Limoges. The communist FTP resistance fighters launch a coordinated attack on the German garrison. It's ambitious, maybe too ambitious. For 1 day, they liberate Tulle. The townspeople celebrate in the streets. They think freedom has arrived. They're wrong. On June 8th, elements of Das Reich arrive in force. Armored vehicles, hundreds of troops. The FTP fighters retreat. They know they can't fight tanks with rifles. The Germans retake Tulle. And they're furious. According to German reports, they found 64 dead German soldiers in the town. Some of the bodies were allegedly mutilated, genitals cut off, faces destroyed, covered in excrement. The Germans claim this justifies what happens next. French sources dispute these claims, saying the mutilations were accidents or propaganda. It doesn't matter. The Germans have decided on revenge. June 9th, 1944. At dawn, SS troops under Major Alfred Koch go door to door in Tulle. They round up every male between ages 16 and 60. About 3,000 men and boys are marched to a factory courtyard. The selection begins. Who looks like a partisan? Who looks suspicious? Who doesn't have papers proving they're essential workers? By afternoon, 120 men have been selected for execution. Not because they're proven resistance fighters, just because the Germans need to make an example. Posters go up around town. Citizens of Tulle, 40 German soldiers have been killed in the most horrible way by communist terrorist groups. For fighters of the maquis and those who helped them, there is only one sentence: death by hanging. The number of German dead keeps changing in German reports, but it doesn't matter. They've decided 120 will hang. At 5 p.m., the executions begin. Lampposts, balconies, trees, anywhere a rope can be strung. The men are brought out in groups of 10, hands tied behind their backs, forced up ladders, nooses placed around their necks. Then the ladders are kicked away. They don't drop far enough to break their necks. They strangle slowly. It takes minutes. The executions last 3 hours. By 7 p.m., 99 men hang from makeshift gallows throughout Tulle. Why only 99 when they selected 120? According to author Max Hastings, they ran out of rope. 21 were spared because the Germans literally didn't have enough rope to hang them all. The bodies are left hanging overnight as a warning. The next day, another 149 men are deported to Dachau concentration camp. Of those, 101 will never return. Tulle becomes known as the City of Martyrs. But Das Reich isn't done. Not even close. June 10th, 1944. SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Dieckmann commands the 1st Battalion of the 4th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. He's 29 years old, a close friend of SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kempfe, who commanded the 2nd SS Reconnaissance Battalion. On June 9th, Kempfe was captured by resistance fighters. He was traveling in a vehicle marked as a German ambulance, supposedly protected by the Geneva Conventions. The Maquis didn't care. They handed him over to Colonel Georges Guingouin, a communist resistance leader. Guingouin ordered Kempfe executed. According to French informants, Kempfe was burned alive. The story reaches Dieckmann. He's devastated. His close friend tortured and killed by the Maquis. On the morning of June 10th, 2 members of the milice, French collaborators, approach Dieckmann. They claim a German officer is being held prisoner in Oradour-sur-Glane, a nearby village. Dieckmann misunderstands or doesn't care about the distinction. He heads to Oradour-sur-Glane instead, a different village entirely, a village that has nothing to do with any of this. Oradour-sur-Glane is a quiet farming community about 15 miles northwest of Limoges, population around 350. But on this Saturday, it swelled to about 650 people. Refugees from other parts of France have taken shelter here. Some are Jewish, fleeing Nazi persecution. The village hasn't been touched by the war. It's peaceful, safe, a place where nothing happens. At 2 p.m., Dieckmann's battalion arrives. 120 SS troops in trucks and armored vehicles. They surround the village. Machine guns are set up at every exit. Nobody's getting out. The soldiers go door to door. Everyone out. Bring your papers. We're checking identities. It seems routine. Annoying, but routine. The villagers gather in the market square. Old men, mothers holding babies, school children still in their uniforms. 6 cyclists who happen to be passing through the village get caught in the roundup too. Wrong place, wrong time. They're dead men and they don't know it yet. The SS separates them by gender. Women and children to the left, men to the right. 445 women and children, including 205 children and babies. 197 men. The women and children are marched to the village church. It's a stone building, solid with stained glass windows. The SS tells them they're just going to check the church for hidden weapons and ammunition. Then they'll let everyone go. The women file inside, holding their babies, clutching their children's hands. The heavy wooden doors close behind them. The SS locks them in. The men are divided into 6 groups and march to barns and sheds on the outskirts of the village. Machine guns are already positioned in front of the barn doors. The men see them. They know. This isn't a paper check. This is an execution. But there's nowhere to run. SS troops with automatic weapons surround them. At approximately 4 p.m., the massacre begins. In the barns, the SS opens fire. Not at head height to kill quickly. At leg height. They want the men wounded and helpless on the ground. The machine guns thunder. Men scream and fall. Blood pools on the dirt floors. Some are killed instantly. Most are just wounded, lying on top of each other, groaning, crying out for help. Then the SS troops enter the barns. They pile hay and straw on top of the wounded and dying men. They pour gasoline over everything. They light it on fire. The barns become infernos. The men who survived the machine guns are burned alive. A few manage to crawl out. They're shot immediately. In the church, the women and children hear the machine gun fire from the barns. They know what's happening. Panic spreads. Mothers try to calm their terrified children. Then SS troops drag a large box into the church. It's filled with some kind of incendiary device. They position it in the center of the nave. They light the fuse. They leave. They lock the doors from outside. The device explodes. It's not enough to kill everyone instantly. It's enough to start a massive fire. The church fills with smoke and flames. Women and children stampede toward the doors. They're locked. They claw at the windows. The stained glass is too high. They can't reach it. The SS has positioned machine guns outside the church. They're ready. Some women break through a window or a small door. They're cut down immediately in a hail of bullets. 47-year-old Marguerite Rouffanche sees a window behind the altar. It's about 10 feet off the ground. She climbs onto a pile of bodies, her neighbors and friends already dead or dying. She pulls herself up. She jumps. She lands in the garden behind the church. She's shot 5 times by SS troops who see her escape. She collapses into some vegetation. She lies there, bleeding, unable to move, listening to the screams from inside the church as everyone burns to death. The fire rages for hours. The roof collapses. The stone walls crack from the heat. By evening, 445 women and children are dead, burned beyond recognition, bones and ash. Marguerite Rouffanche is the only survivor from the church. She'll spend over a year recovering from her injuries. She'll testify at trial in 1953, describing what she witnessed. 7 people total survived the massacre. 5 men protected by fallen bodies in the barns managed to escape after the SS leaves. 1 boy escapes before the roundup. And Marguerite, that's it. 7 out of 6 of 42. After the killing, the SS loots the village. They take anything of value. Then they burn every building to the ground. By 8 p.m., Oradour-sur-Glane is a smoking ruin. Not a single structure is left standing. The entire village has been erased. Dieckmann gathers his officers that evening. He orders them never to speak of what happened. Don't write anything down. Don't tell anyone. It's a secret, except it's not a secret. Word spreads immediately. French officials inform the Vichy government. The Vichy government, Nazi collaborators, is horrified. They know this is going to be a problem. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in France, learns about it. He's furious. This is exactly the kind of atrocity that turns entire populations against Germany. He demands an explanation. SS Standartenführer Sylvester Stadler, commander of the 4th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, orders a court-martial. Dieckmann is charged with the killings. His defense is that he found Kempfe's body in a burned German ambulance just outside Oradour-sur-Glane. He claims Kempfe was burned alive inside. Seeing his friend's fate, he destroyed the village in retaliation. It's a lie. Kempfe wasn't killed anywhere near Oradour-sur-Glane, but Dieckmann doesn't face trial. On June 29, 1944, he's killed fighting in Normandy. Convenient. SS Brigadeführer Heinz Lammerding, das Reich's division commander, agrees that Dieckmann should have faced court-martial. But now that he's dead, the matter is closed. Except it's not closed. The Allies are liberating France. Survivors are testifying. French authorities are documenting everything. Oradour-sur-Glane becomes a symbol, the martyr village. Charles de Gaulle, leader of Free France, visits the ruins shortly after liberation. He's so shocked by what he sees that he issues an order. Do not rebuild this village. Leave it exactly as it is, forever, as a memorial, as a warning, so that future generations will see what the Nazis did. A new village of Oradour is built nearby, but the original remains in ruins. The burned-out cars still sit in the streets. The melted church bell lies where it fell. The walls stand empty, windows gaping like eye sockets. You can visit it today, walk through the ghost village, see the doctor's office with the rusted medical equipment still on the shelves. See the schoolroom with tiny desks. See the church where 445 women and children burned. It's frozen in time. June 10th, 1944. The day evil visited. But what about justice? What happened to the men who did this? Lammerding is sentenced to death in absentia by a French court in 1953. But he's living in West Germany. The West German government refuses to extradite him. Why? Because he'd already been prosecuted in Germany for war crimes on the Eastern Front and served time. Under the Bonn Constitution, he can't be extradited for the same crimes, except they're not the same crimes. But Germany doesn't care. Lammerding lives free in West Germany until 1971, when he dies of natural causes. He never spends a day in prison for Oradour-sur-Glane. The French are furious. In the 1960s, there are discussions about an Israeli-style commando raid to kidnap Lammerding and bring him to France for trial. It never happens. Lammerding dies unpunished. In 1953, the French military court in Bordeaux prosecutes 21 former members of Das Reich for the massacres at Oradour and Tulle. This is the moment survivors have waited for. Justice. Finally. But the trial becomes a nightmare. Of the 21 defendants, 14 are Alsatian. They're ethnic Germans from Alsace-Lorraine, regions that Germany annexed early in the war. These men claim they were forcibly conscripted into the Waffen-SS. They call themselves malgré nous, meaning against our will. They say they had no choice. If they refused to serve, their families would be sent to concentration camps under the Nazi policy of Sippenhaft, collective family punishment. If they deserted, their parents and siblings would die. So they served. And yes, they participated in war crimes, but they argue it was under duress. This creates an impossible situation for French justice. The Alsatians are technically French citizens. Their regions were French before the war, but they were forced to be German, forced to fight for Germany, forced to commit atrocities. Are they war criminals or are they victims? The trial is a mess. Survivors testify. Marguerite Rouffanche takes the stand. She describes the church burning. She describes jumping out the window, being shot, lying in the garden for 24 hours before being rescued. She describes hearing the screams of 445 women and children as they burned alive. The courtroom is silent. Some people cry. Other survivors testify. The evidence is overwhelming. The court convicts 20 of the 21 defendants. 2 are sentenced to death. The rest get prison terms ranging from 5 to 20 years. But here's where French politics destroys justice. Alsace erupts in protest. The Alsatian regional government demands amnesty for the malgré nous. They argue these men are victims too, that prosecuting them is unfair, that it punishes Alsace for Germany's crimes. The French National Assembly is under enormous pressure. The trial has created a political crisis. On February 19, 1953, just weeks after the sentences, the French Parliament passes an amnesty law for the malgré nous. Everyone convicted at the Bordeaux trial is freed, including the 2 sentenced to death. The survivors are devastated. They've waited 9 years for justice. They testified. They relived the worst day of their lives. And the men who murdered their families walk free, not because they're innocent, but because of politics. The National Association of Families of Martyrs, representing the survivors' and victims' families, is so angry they exclude French government officials from commemorations for the next 20 years. They organize private ceremonies. No politicians allowed. The wound is too deep. But one man does face justice. SS Oberscharführer Heinz Barth. He was a sergeant, a platoon commander whose soldiers shot the men in the barns. After the war, he disappears. He's living under an assumed name in East Germany. In 1981, East German authorities arrest him. They've been building a case. East Germany prosecutes him for war crimes. The trial is in East Berlin. Barth is convicted of murdering civilians at Oradour-sur-Glane. He's sentenced to life in prison. He serves 16 years before being released in 1997 due to poor health. He dies in 2007 at age 86. That's it. One conviction. One life sentence that becomes 16 years. Out of 120 SS men who participated in the massacre, one faces real consequences. The rest? Most were never even charged. They went home. They lived normal lives. They had families. They got jobs. They grew old and died peacefully in their beds. Not one of them spent a night thinking about the 205 children they burned alive. Robert Hebras was 18 years old on June 10, 1944. He was one of the 6 men who survived. He spent the rest of his life telling his story, making sure people never forget. He spoke at schools, he gave interviews, he guided visitors through the ruins. His mother and 2 sisters died in the church. He lived to be 97 years old, dying in 2023. For 79 years, he carried the memory of that day. Wanda Poltowska survived the Ravensbrück medical experiments and lived to 102. Robert Hebras survived Oradour and lived to 97. The survivors outlived most of the perpetrators. That's not justice, but it's something. The French built a memorial at Oradour. The ruins are a national monument. Over 300,000 people visit every year. The Centre de la Mémoire, the Remembrance Center, tells the story with photographs, artifacts, and testimony. The names of all 642 victims are engraved on memorial plaques. 642 individuals? Not a number. People. The local mechanic, a baker, a seamstress, farmers, teachers, school children, babies. The youngest victim was an infant, 8 days old. The oldest was 86. In between, every age. Teenagers, young mothers, middle-aged fathers, grandparents. All murdered in one afternoon because a German officer wanted revenge for something the village had nothing to do with. Das Reich committed over 120 documented atrocities in France between May and July 1944. Oradour-sur-Glane is the most famous, but it's not unique. They burned villages throughout southern France. They hanged civilians. They shot hostages. It was policy, terrorize the population, break the resistance. They didn't break the resistance. They just created more resistance fighters. Every village they burned, every person they killed, turned more French civilians against Germany. It was counterproductive even by German military standards. Rommel knew this. That's why he was furious about Oradour. But the SS didn't care about military effectiveness. They cared about punishment. The same division, Das Reich, was responsible for other massacres across Europe. On the Eastern Front, they burned villages in Ukraine and Belarus. They murdered civilians in reprisals. They learned their methods in the East and brought them to France. Oradour wasn't an aberration. It was standard operating procedure. This is what makes the lack of prosecution so infuriating. These weren't random acts of violence. This was policy, official policy. Lammerding wrote it down. Plan Lammerding. 3 civilians for every wounded German, 10 for every dead German. It's documented. It's in the archives. And he died free. Here's what should keep us up at night. Of the approximately 15,000 men in Das Reich, only a handful were ever prosecuted. Most went home to Germany after the war. They blended in. They became shopkeepers and accountants and factory workers. They didn't tell their children what they did in France, and Germany protected them. West Germany in the 1950s and 60s had no appetite for prosecuting war crimes. The Cold War was starting. They needed to rebuild. They needed to move forward. Dwelling on the past wasn't productive. The Bordeaux trial in 1953 was supposed to be a watershed moment. Finally, justice for Oradour. Instead, it became a political catastrophe that fractured France and left survivors feeling betrayed. The amnesty for the Alsatian defendants sent a message. Some war crimes are forgivable if they're politically inconvenient to prosecute. That's not justice. That's politics using justice as a tool. And it failed the 642 dead. It failed the 7 survivors. It failed the families who lost everything. What's the lesson here? That atrocities go unpunished when it's easier to move on than to confront the past? That political expediency trumps justice? That if you commit enough war crimes, you might get away with it because prosecuting all of them is too complicated? Oradour-sur-Glane stands as a warning. But a warning of what? Of Nazi brutality, yes. But also of the failure of post-war justice. Of the compromises that let murderers go free. Of the political decisions that valued regional harmony over accountability. The ruins are there. You can visit. You can walk through the burned-out village. You can stand in the church where 445 women and children died. You can see the rusted sewing machines still sitting in the seamstress's shop. You can see the burned cars, the melted bell, the empty windows. And you can ask yourself, did the men who did this face justice? The answer is no. Most of them didn't. And that should haunt us more than the ruins themselves. Because the ruins are a memorial to the victims, but the lack of justice is a memorial to our failure. Our collective failure to hold war criminals accountable. Our willingness to look away when prosecution becomes inconvenient. Our prioritization of political stability over moral accountability. Oradour-sur-Glane remembers. The question is, what do we do with that memory? Do we let it be a comfortable museum visit, a tourist attraction? Or do we let it challenge us, make us uncomfortable, force us to confront the reality that justice failed these people? That most of their murderers died free? The village stands frozen, June 10th, 1944. Forever. A monument to innocence destroyed and justice denied. Visit it. Walk through it. Let it disturb you. Because that's the point. Charles de Gaulle understood that. Leave it in ruins. Don't rebuild. Don't sanitize. Don't make it comfortable. Let people see exactly what happened. Let them confront the burned walls and the melted metal and the empty streets. Let them imagine 642 people who woke up that morning thinking it was just another Saturday. And let them remember that the men who did this mostly got away with it. That's the real horror of Oradour-sur-Glane. Not just what happened, but what didn't happen afterward.